The gavel was about to fall. In a crowded Portland courtroom, a silver-haired former police officer sat in silence, accused of crimes he never committed. Beside the doors, his loyal German shepherd, Valor, waited just as he had for 20 years. The whispers painted him as a monster, but the truth was buried deeper. On a storm-soaked night 2 decades ago, this man had opened his door to two trembling little girls in pink dresses, abandoned and forgotten. Tonight, the past was back to tear them apart, or to prove that love, once sown, can outlive every storm. The rain had been falling for hours, unrelenting sheets of water slamming against the narrow streets of Portland, Oregon. The sky was swollen with heavy clouds, bruised in shades of gray and violet, and every streetlight flickered under the assault of the storm. Declan Hayes gripped the steering wheel of his patrol car with one hand, the other resting absently on the worn leather leash of his partner, a German shepherd named Valor, who sat tall in the passenger seat. Declan was 40 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair touched by early streaks of silver. His eyes carried the weight of grief. Just a year ago, he had buried his wife, and since then, silence had become both companion and punishment. He no longer sought the chatter of colleagues, preferring the company of his dog, whose amber eyes seemed to understand sorrows that words could not bear. Declan's reputation in the precinct was a man of duty but of distance, respected but rarely approached. Valor, 4 years old, was a large German shepherd with black and tan fur that gleamed even under dim light, his ears always alert. Unlike other dogs in the force, Valor had a gentle temperament off duty. He had once been trained for search and rescue, but what made him different was his uncanny ability to read moods. He would nudge Declan with his nose when his partner's grief grew too heavy, sit at his feet during long, restless nights, and bark fiercely at anything that smelled of threat. In a way, he had become not just a partner, but a bridge between Declan and the world he had almost abandoned. That night, the storm drove most people indoors. Streets emptied, save for the occasional homeless figure hunched under cardboard or a bus struggling against flooded intersections. Declan patrolled slowly, not expecting crime, only scanning for those the city often forgot. It was Valor who reacted first. The dog's ears pricked, then his body stiffened, his nose pressed against the glass. A sudden bark tore from his throat, low and insistent. Declan frowned, pulling the car toward the alley where Valor's gaze was fixed. The headlights caught movement, a pair of small figures huddled near a trash bin, their outlines trembling in the storm. Declan cut the engine, stepped into the rain, and his boots splashed into ankle-deep puddles. The beam of his flashlight sliced through the darkness. "Who's there?" he called, his voice low but steady. The light revealed them. Two little girls, perhaps 6 years old, identical in their features but not in their expressions. Both had long, tangled blonde hair, plastered wet to their cheeks, and both wore pink dresses now soaked, clinging to their frail frames. Their shoes, once white, were now muddied beyond recognition. One of the girls, with wide gray eyes that seemed older than her years, threw her thin arms in front of the other as though to shield her. Her small jaw trembled, but her stare was fierce, like an animal backed into a corner. The other girl clutched a torn fabric bag to her chest, her lips tinged blue from the cold, eyes brimming with tears. Declan felt the breath catch in his throat. He had seen starving children in crime scenes, in refugee reports overseas, but never so close, never so vulnerable. The rain pounded on his shoulders as he knelt, lowering the flashlight so it would not blind them. He let his tone soften, his words weighted with calm. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. "Tell me, have you had anything to eat tonight?" The girls said nothing, but their silence was heavy, their ribs faintly visible through the thin fabric. Valor stepped forward, shaking the rain from his fur, and stood between Declan and the twins. His body was strong and imposing, yet he lowered his head, his amber eyes meeting the children's gaze without aggression. The second girl, the one clutching the bag, blinked at the dog, her tears pausing as though some instinct told her she could trust him. Declan knew Valor was giving them a choice: trust the man or trust the animal that trusted the man. He stepped back slightly, opened the rear door of his car, and let warm yellow light spill into the alley. "It's cold. There's heat inside and dry blankets. If you want to leave, The door stays open, but at least warm yourselves for a while." For a long moment, the older twin stared, suspicion hard in her eyes. Then she pulled her sister close, and slowly both shuffled forward, crossing the threshold into Declan's world. Back at his modest home, a small wooden house tucked into the edge of the city, Declan moved with quiet precision. He hung their dripping clothes by the stove, gave them dry towels, and rummaged through a basket of spare garments, his late wife's idea to always keep extras for emergencies. He didn't force them, only gestured gently. He set Valor by the fireplace, the dog's warmth radiating comfort. In the kitchen, he opened cans of chicken soup, added pepper, and stirred as steam filled the air, carrying with it a fragile sense of peace. The twins sat pressed together at the table, their hands gripping the edges, eyes darting warily at every movement. Declan set steaming bowls before them, placed a plate of bread in the center, and quietly said, "Go on, eat." The younger twin, after hesitating, dipped her spoon and tasted. Her small shoulders slumped, tears rolling down her face, but this time from relief. The older girl followed, cautious yet unable to resist. Declan ate with them, deliberately slow, showing them there was no trick, only a meal. He then asked gently, "What are your names?" After a long silence, the smaller one whispered, "Ellie." She pointed to her sister. "Emma." Declan took a piece of paper, wrote their names in firm strokes, and set it on the table as though to seal a promise. "Tonight you'll sleep here. Tomorrow I'll take you to the doctor. After that, we'll see what comes next. But no one separates you tonight, I promise." Later, Declan prepared makeshift beds near the fireplace. The girls huddled beneath blankets, still wary but no longer shivering. Valor curled close to them, his body shielding their fragile forms. Declan watched in silence, his stern features softening as he pulled a blanket gently over Emma. When her torn bag slipped, a photo fell out. Declan picked it up. The picture was damp, blurred, showing a woman with sharp features standing beside a man in front of an old house. Scribbled beneath was a date, the very day they were found. Declan's chest tightened. On the woman's wrist was a faint red mark, a detail he couldn't ignore. He slid the photo into a brown envelope, placed it next to his old compass, and sat in his chair, eyes heavy with questions. Outside, the storm raged on. But within those four walls, a fragile beginning had taken root. The storm had passed, leaving Portland washed clean, its streets glistening under the pale gray light of morning. Declan Hayes stood at the stove, his back to the fire where the two girls still slept, curled close to one another. Valor lying stretched out at their feet. He moved quietly, almost ritualistically, as though afraid any sound might shatter the fragile trust built the night before. His eyes, heavy-lidded from lack of sleep, softened whenever they strayed to the small bundles on the floor. When Ellie stirred first, her messy blonde hair spilling over her thin face, Declan greeted her with a gentle nod. "Morning, little warrior," he said softly, sliding a plate of pancakes onto the table. Emma awoke soon after, still clutching the torn fabric bag she refused to let go of. Valor rose, tail sweeping the floor, and pressed his nose against her hand, coaxing out a faint smile. Declan knew he could not delay. Duty required him to report the girls to Child Protective Services. Yet his gut twisted at the thought of separation. At the clinic, Dr. Patel, a middle-aged Indian-American physician with kind eyes behind rimmed glasses, welcomed them. He examined the twins thoroughly, noting the pallor of their skin, the hollowness in their cheeks. "Malnourished," he murmured, frowning. "Especially the smaller one. Iron levels low, and signs of prolonged stress. These children have seen more than they should." He paused, meeting Declan's gaze. "They will need more than food, officer. They will need stability." Declan nodded, his jaw tightening, silently promising what his heart already knew. After the checkup, they stopped by the CPS office. A young worker named Marissa Klein took the file. She was in her late 20s, red-haired with freckles across her nose, polite but brisk, the kind who believed in procedure more than instinct. She tapped her pen against the form. "We'll have to review placement options," she said. "Siblings are usually kept together, but no guarantees." Declan's heart lurched. He forced his voice calm. "They stay together, he said, each word deliberate. Marissa looked up, startled by the intensity in his eyes, then nodded cautiously, though Declan saw the doubt lingering behind her professional mask. As he left, Valor pressed close against his leg as if sensing his turmoil. Days slipped into weeks. The girls began to adapt, though shadows still haunted their eyes. Valor became their anchor. Ellie often buried her face in his thick fur when nightmares woke her, and Emma, quieter, followed the dog everywhere, her small hand gripping his collar as though he were a lifeline. Declan often found himself listening to their laughter, soft, hesitant at first, spilling into his lonely house, filling spaces where silence had reigned for years. It was healing for him as much as it was for them. But the world outside was not so gentle. When Declan enrolled the twins in a nearby elementary school, he thought structure would help. Yet children could be cruel. One afternoon, he arrived to find Ellie standing apart in the playground, her cheeks streaked with tears, while other kids whispered behind cupped hands. "Orphan?" one boy sneered before running off. Ellie's fists were clenched, her tiny frame trembling with humiliation. Declan knelt before her, brushing damp hair from her forehead. "You're not alone," he said quietly, his voice breaking, though he forced a smile. "You've got me, your sister, and Valor. Don't you forget that." Ellie wiped her nose on her sleeve, nodding, but the wound lingered deeper than she could show. That evening, as Declan stepped onto his porch, the hair on Valor's neck bristled. The dog growled low, his body tense. In the dim light, Declan caught sight of a figure lingering at the far end of the street. A man in a long coat, hat pulled low, watching too intently. Declan called out, but the man turned and slipped into the shadows. Valor barked sharply, straining against his leash, his amber eyes fixed on the retreating form. Declan's hand went instinctively to the holster he no longer carried off duty, and his chest tightened. When he returned inside, his gaze fell to the envelope on the mantel, the photograph of the sharp-featured woman, the red mark on her wrist. The image haunted him more now, merging with the silhouette of the man outside. He poured himself a coffee he didn't need, staring into the dark swirl, unable to shake the sense that something larger was circling them. Something tied to the past these children carried with them like invisible scars. As the twins finally fell asleep that night, Valor curled protectively at their side. Declan sat in his chair, the firelight flickering across his weary face. For the first time in years, he whispered a prayer, not for himself, but for the strength to keep the promise he had made. No one would separate Ellie and Emma. Not the system, not the cruelty of children, not the shadows of the past. They were his now, and he would stand between them and every storm. 2 decades had passed since that rain-soaked night when Declan Hayes had found 2 little girls trembling beside a trash bin. The years had reshaped every face in the household, softened grief into endurance, and transformed wounds into purpose. Declan himself, once a man of 40 bearing the raw ache of widowhood, was now 60. His dark hair had surrendered almost completely to silver. His back was still broad, though slightly stooped, and lines ran deep around his eyes, carved by both sorrow and resilience. His days of active duty as a Portland police officer were long behind him. He had retired from the force, though his presence in the community remained respected. He was known as the officer who raised 2 daughters, not his by blood, yet fiercely his in every way that mattered. Ellie Hayes had become the embodiment of determination. At 26, she stood tall, with long blonde hair tied back neatly, sharp gray eyes set behind rimmed glasses, and a wardrobe of dark tailored suits that made her appear older than her years. She had pursued law with unshakable conviction, fueled by memories of injustice carved into her childhood. In the courtroom, she was fearless, her words cutting, her belief in truth unshaken. But outside, she remained warm, quick to laugh with her sister, still the girl who once buried her face in Valor's fur. Emma Hayes, her identical twin, had chosen a different path. With the same hair but worn loosely around her shoulders, and the same gray eyes softened by compassion, she had grown into a social worker and activist for children's rights. At 26, she carried herself with approachable energy, always in motion, her wardrobe practical but cheerful. She preferred the company of those she helped, often kneeling to speak eye to eye with children in shelters or visiting foster families. Unlike Ellie's sharp edges, Emma's heart poured over every boundary, and it was that tenderness that made her a beacon for others. At the heart of their lives still remained Valor, once the vigorous 4-year-old sentinel, now 24 in human years. He was an old soul with a graying muzzle, slower movements, and eyes that had dimmed but never lost their flame. His loyalty remained unchanged. He no longer barked at every passerby, but reserved his strength for moments that mattered. In quiet evenings, he would rest at Declan's feet, breathing deeply, and when the sisters returned home, his tail still thumped against the floor in slow but steady rhythm. He had become the living bridge between their childhood and their adult years, the constant reminder of promises made and kept. Life might have continued in this rhythm, but shadows rarely remain buried forever. The first hint of trouble arrived in whispers neighbors noting a woman asking questions near the old CPS office, a stranger inquiring about Declan at the local diner. Declan dismissed them at first, chalking it up to coincidence, until one evening Valor stiffened on the porch. His ears pricked, his body tensed, and his low growl carried through the night. Declan stepped outside and caught sight of a man across the street, tall and lean, a trench coat drawn tight, his face hidden under the brim of a hat. The man lingered a moment too long before slipping away into the darkness. Declan's instincts flared. He had seen such surveillance before, long ago during his police work. This was no casual passerby. It was days later that the blow landed fully. A thick envelope arrived at Declan's door. Inside were legal documents, stamped and official. At the top, the name Veronica Vance, the stepmother who had once starved and abandoned Ellie and Emma blazed like a wound reopened. She was alive, and not only alive but back. Through her attorney, a young, ambitious man named Carter Holloway, she was filing suit to reclaim guardianship rights over her daughters, claiming Declan had unlawfully used his badge to manipulate the system, withholding the girls for his own gain. Carter Holloway was a man in his early 30s, tall and impeccably dressed, with slick black hair combed back and an expression that rarely betrayed uncertainty. He had graduated from Yale, the kind who believed law was a ladder to power rather than a shield for the vulnerable. His speeches were rehearsed, his ambition apparent in every polished sentence. He saw Veronica's case as an opportunity to make a name for himself, an uphill battle wrapped in spectacle. To him, Declan was not just a retired cop, he was the perfect foil, a man with a blemished history, easy to cast as corrupt. Veronica herself, after 20 years, returned draped in fragile elegance. Once sharp and cold, she now wore her age like a costume of pity-dyed blonde hair, framing a carefully powdered face, her voice practiced to tremble at the right moments. But beneath the surface, the same greed glittered in her eyes. She spun a tale of a mother forced away, manipulated by a domineering officer, now seeking redemption and reunion with her daughters. The public, who had only known fragments of the past, began to murmur. For Declan, the sting was not only in her accusations, but in the timing. 20 years ago, while on duty, he had been transferred after a controversial internal case involving the use of excessive force during an arrest. Though he had been cleared, suspicion lingered in the precinct for months, eventually pushing him toward early retirement. It had been his deepest wound, one he kept buried even from Ellie and Emma. Now Carter unearthed it, presenting it as evidence of character unfit for guardianship. Sacrani, Declan's pride, already worn by years of loss, bent under the weight of old ghosts. At home that night, Ellie paced the kitchen, her heels clicking against the floor, fury sharpening her every word. She abandoned us, Dad. We have proof. We remember. This won't stand. Emma, sitting beside Valor, stroked the dog's graying fur, her face more troubled. People will believe her if she cries loud enough. We've seen it before. We need to be ready. Declan sat silently, the envelope heavy in his hands, the firelight painting deep shadows across his weathered face. Valor lifted his head, eyes meeting his master's, as if to remind him of that first promise in the storm. They stayed together. Declan exhaled slowly. We've fought storms before, he said at last. We'll fight this one too. The courthouse in downtown Portland was crowded that morning, its marble floors echoing with footsteps and murmurs as neighbors, journalists, and curious onlookers filed into the gallery. The trial had captured the city's attention, not because Declan Hayes was a man of wealth or fame, but because the story carried all the marks of tragedy and betrayal. A stepmother who claimed to have been driven away, abandoned children, and a retired police officer accused of manipulation and cruelty. The newspapers framed it as a battle for truth, though most had already begun to cast Declan as the villain. Declan entered the courtroom wearing his best suit, a simple navy jacket that no longer fit as it once had. His once broad frame had thinned with age, his hair silver and combed neatly back, his eyes heavy but steady. He did not speak much, only nodded briefly to the bailiff before sitting at the defendant's table. His court-appointed lawyer, a young man named Daniel Mercer, no older than 30, shuffled papers nervously beside him. Daniel had sandy hair, pale skin, and wore a cheap gray suit that seemed 2 sizes too large. His inexperience clung to him, hesitant eyes, trembling fingers, a voice that cracked when he addressed the judge. Declan looked at him once, long enough to know he would be fighting this battle largely alone. Across the room, Veronica Vance played her role with near perfection. At 50, she had crafted herself into a portrait of suffering motherhood. Her blonde hair cut in soft waves that framed her powdered face, her dark dress chosen to suggest mourning, her eyes rimmed in red as if sleepless from years of grief. When she took the stand, her voice trembled on cue. "I was young and frightened," she said, letting tears slip down her cheek. "Officer Hayes, he was intimidating. He used his badge to silence me. I left only because I feared for my daughter's safety. Every day since, my heart has ached for them." Her attorney, Carter Holloway, stood tall beside her, his words sharp and theatrical, painting Declan as a manipulative abuser who had robbed a mother of her children and reaped the glory of raising them. The prosecution's centerpiece came in the form of an old video clip. On the screen, grainy footage flickered. A younger Declan, 20 years ago, gripping Caleb, a neighborhood boy from another case, by the arm during a fight at school. The video cut off before the boy was calmed, before the context could be understood. What remained was an image of Declan's stern face and a struggling child, enough to twist perception. Gasps rippled across the gallery. Jurors leaned forward, whispering among themselves. Declan sat motionless, jaw tight, knowing the truth had been gutted by the scissors of clever editing. Daniel Mercer attempted a cross-examination, but stumbled. "Mrs. Vance, you say you were threatened. Did Officer Hayes ever, physically harm you?" Veronica dabbed her eyes delicately, shaking her head just enough to look fragile, then murmured, "He didn't have to." His silence was enough. The jurors scribbled notes, their expressions unreadable. Daniel's questions fizzled out, and Carter seized the moment, pacing dramatically. "The silence of a predator is more dangerous than word," he declared, his voice echoing through the chamber. The gallery nodded. Declan longed to stand, to tell them of the rainy night when 2 starving girls had trembled in his arms, of valor's bark breaking the darkness, of the promise he had sworn. But each time he shifted forward, Daniel tugged at his sleeve, whispering, "Don't. It'll hurt the case." And so Declan remained silent, a soldier obeying orders, though the silence burned. Outside the heavy doors, Valor waited. Old now, his once proud stance had softened with age, his muzzle frosted with white. Yet he stood guard on the courthouse steps, eyes fixed on the entrance. Passers-by noticed the dog, murmuring at his loyalty. Some children reached out to pat his fur, but Valor only tolerated it briefly before turning his gaze back to the doors, as if he knew his master needed him close. Inside, Declan occasionally thought of him and drew strength, recalling the countless nights Valor had kept watch over his family. Hours dragged. Testimony after testimony chipped away at Declan's dignity. The frail alcoholic witness claimed he once heard cries from Declan's house. Neighbors muttered about his stern discipline, and Veronica wept through it all, painting herself as a victim of circumstance. By afternoon, the judge, a stern man named Harold Peterson, with graying temples and a voice like stone, lifted his gavel. This court, having reviewed the testimony, finds sufficient grounds to declare preliminary guilt. His words hung like a blade, and then the heavy oak doors burst open. A collective gasp spread through the courtroom as two figures strode in, poised and resolute. Ellie and Emma Hayes, no longer the trembling girls in pink dresses, but two accomplished women. Ellie, in a dark-tailored suit, her hair pulled back, carried a thick stack of files. Her stride was firm, her eyes blazing with conviction. Beside her, Emma, in a simple navy dress, exuded quiet strength, her gaze steady and unyielding. The murmurs rose. The judge's gavel rapped sharply for silence. "We are the daughters of Declan Hayes," Ellie's voice rang clear across the chamber, "and we are here to testify." The gallery erupted, half in shock, half in anticipation. Veronica's face blanched, the mask slipping for a fleeting second before she regained her composure. Declan turned, his tired eyes brimming with something not seen since that stormy night long ago. Hope. The silence in the courtroom was heavy, as though every breath had been suspended. Ellie Hayes stepped forward, her tailored black suit sharp against the oak backdrop, her blonde hair tied neatly in a bun. Her gray eyes glistened not with fear, but with resolve carved from 2 decades of remembering every night of hunger, every shadow of abandonment, and every moment of safety Declan had given them. She placed a thick folder on the clerk's desk, her voice cutting through the charged air. "Your Honor, these are the original records from Child Protective Services, dated 20 years ago. They conclude with clarity. No signs of abuse under Officer Hayes' care. They document the malnutrition and neglect my sister and I suffered before he found us." The jurors leaned forward, pens frozen midair. Ellie continued, her words unwavering. "He was not our captor. He was our rescuer, our father." Beside her stood Emma Hayes, dressed more simply in a navy dress, her blonde hair falling to her shoulders. Her presence contrasted her sister's edge. Her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of lived experience. She stepped to the stand, her hands clasped in front of her, her eyes fixed not on the jury but on Veronica herself. "We remember nights locked outside in the cold, while she, our stepmother, fed herself and left us to starve. We remember her words, that we were burdens, that we did not deserve a family. Declan Hayes saved us. He gave us food, warmth, and love when we had nothing. Without him, we would not be alive today." Her words trembled only once, but the tremor spread through the gallery like a crack in glass. Veronica's mask faltered. Her carefully powdered face stiffened, her lips pressed into a thin line. She attempted to interject, but Judge Harold Peterson raised a hand, silencing her. At that moment, Ellie pulled a smaller envelope from her folder. "Your Honor, these are drawings I made as a child. They show what our lives were then." She held them up one by one. The first, a crude sketch of a locked house in the rain, 2 stick figures huddled outside. The gallery murmured. Then another drawing, brighter, filled with the image of a wooden cabin, 4 figures gathered around a table, a large dog curled beside them. "This," Ellie said, her voice firm, "was our truth. This was our family. He was the one who sat with us when we cried. Valor, his dog, was the one who guarded us while we slept. This man and this dog gave us a home." As if on cue, the doors to the gallery creaked. Valor, led gently by a court officer who had allowed his presence, padded forward, his steps slower now, his muzzle white, but his eyes still steady. The jurors turned, some smiling faintly at the sight of the aging German shepherd who had once barked through a storm to save 2 little girls. Valor stood beside Declan's chair, leaning his weight gently against his master's leg. His gaze turned toward Ellie and Emma, as though affirming their every word. Declan's hand instinctively lowered, stroking the dog's fur, his eyes misting, though his face remained composed. Carter Halloway, Veronica's attorney, tried to recover. "Your Honor, this is emotional manipulation. Childhood drawings are hardly evidence." But Ellie was ready. She slid another file across the desk. "We anticipated that. Here are medical records from Dr. Patel, 20 years old, detailing our physical state when Declan brought us to the clinic. Severe malnutrition, iron deficiency, and clear indications of neglect, all occurring before we were placed in his home. These reports confirm the timeline, and here are sworn letters from neighbors who witnessed Veronica leaving us alone for days. The truth is consistent, Your Honor. She abandoned us. Declan Hayes saved us. The courtroom shifted. Jurors exchanged looks, some nodding, others visibly moved. Judge Peterson leaned back, his sharp eyes narrowing at Veronica. "Do you wish to respond to these accusations?" Veronica stammered, her earlier composure crumbling. They're lying. He brainwashed them. They don't remember clearly." But her words lacked force. The gallery murmured louder, disbelieving. Finally, Judge Peterson struck his gavel. "Order!" He took a long breath before speaking. "This court, after reviewing all evidence and testimony, finds the charges against Mr. Declan Hayes to be without merit. He is declared not guilty." Relief surged like a wave through the room. Then the gavel struck again, sharper. Furthermore, based on evidence of severe child neglect and false testimony, Veronica Vance is found guilty of abandonment and defamation. She will face sentencing as prescribed by law. Veronica collapsed back into her chair, her hands trembling, the mask of sorrow shattered beyond repair. Declan closed his eyes, his hands shaking as valor pressed against him. Ellie and Emma rushed to his side, each taking a hand, their faces radiant with triumph and love. Tears blurred Declan's vision, but his voice, when it came, was steady. "You saved me," he whispered, the weight of 20 years falling away. Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted in applause. Reporters shouted questions. Neighbors who once doubted came forward, some apologizing through tears. Mrs. Ruth, an old neighbor, pressed his hand tightly. "I was wrong," she said, her voice breaking. "You were the father they needed." Declan only nodded, humility guiding him where pride could have stood. Valor barked once, his aged voice carrying through the street like a declaration of victory. That evening, in the small wooden cabin that had witnessed so much, the family sat around the dinner table. Ellie cooked, Emma set the plates, Declan poured water, and Valor lay at their feet, his head resting contentedly on his paws. The fire glowed warmly, casting golden light on the faces that had once been shadows in the rain. Declan looked at his daughters, at the dog who had stood by him through it all, and his voice softened. "Family isn't blood, it's love, and it's a promise kept for life." The words hung in the air, not as a reminder, but as a vow fulfilled. Sometimes family is not written in blood, but in the promises we keep and the love we give when no one else will. Declan, Ellie, Emma, and Valor remind us that home is built not by walls but by trust, sacrifice, and loyalty that endures through storms. If you believe love can turn strangers into family, share your thoughts in the comments and tell us what family means to you. And if this story touched your heart, please like this video and follow our channel for more stories of hope, redemption, and the power of unconditional love.